Yes, thanks, Tiki. Well, yesterday's auction day was being called an important test for the property market, with experts hoping to see last week's booming auction numbers continue. So, how did we fare? Well, the clearance rate did edge slightly lower after recording its best result in over 12 months last week, with a preliminary rate of 63.7% return across the capital cities from 1,480 auctions. Now, strength in Australia's biggest cities does look to be continuing, with Melbourne returning a preliminary clearance rate of almost 70% from 644 auctions. Melbourne's final clearance rate, which we'll see on Thursday, has been increasing each week this winter, and Corelogic expects it to hold above 65% for the first time in over a year. So some good news there for Melbourne. Looking over at Sydney now, it recorded a preliminary clearance rate of 67.1% from 551 auctions, after last week recording its best result since Easter last year. Looking elsewhere, and Brisbane saw 34.8% clearance rate coming from 114 auctions, while Adelaide cleared 54.7% from 103 auctions. And for a bit more detail on yesterday's auction action, we're joined from Adelaide by Kevin Brogan, Corelogic's national auction commentator. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us. A lot of economists were saying that this was quite an important weekend to see if the strength that we've been seeing would be continued. Now, the numbers that you've been looking at across the country, are you seeing that?
Oh, look, I think it's really interesting. There's a very strong desire to see a positive message in the numbers, and that's entirely understandable. But we have entered the winter season, which, as you've indicated, is a time where auction numbers do decline. I think this week we saw an increase in the clearance rate in Melbourne, and as you said, I mean, hopefully that's going to stay up in the final analysis. Slightly weaker in Sydney. But with slightly more auctions than last week. Look, I think it is a message that is consistent with an increase in confidence in the market, but I think that sort of early excitement has to be tempered by the fact that we're in the winter season, which is traditionally quite a subdued time for auctions.
Yes, the winter blues, of course. But, I mean, when we talk about sentiment out there in the market, it seems that buyers are quite happy. Sellers are kind of cautious, as you can see with the fall in the number of volume out there. So what do you think they're holding out for? Are they waiting for any key moments ahead?
Oh, look, I think there's probably a couple of things. This is the first week where we've seen auctions that could have potentially been listed after the federal election result was known. But you'd have to be fairly quick out of the starting blocks to have taken account of that result and got your property listed for the week that we're reporting on. The other thing is, there's talk of a further interest rate cut. And also, it's expected that the serviceability buffer change, which will perhaps open the gates to a few people who've had trouble meeting those criteria, they're just around the corner. So, look, it may be that the confidence on the supply side with vendors is there, but people might be biding their time until those things kick in, and perhaps biding their time until the spring selling season is upon us.
Yes, and at least one very confident sale over the weekend in Strathfield. 23 Newton Road, we understand, went for $7.1 million, the best or the highest price paid over the weekend. What can you tell us about this place, Kevin?
Oh, look, this is a really interesting case. Of course, Strathfield is an area that's very well regarded. The median house price is currently $2.1 million, so that shows you where this property sits, even in Strathfield. The other thing of interest is this 2,000 square metre sort of resort-style property has sort of bucked the trend. It last sold for $6.8 million 2 years ago by auction with the same agent. So while the median house price for Strathfield has fallen by almost 20%, this property has obviously found a niche highly desirable where they've actually sold it for a price slightly higher than 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's just that 2-year turnaround. Kevin Brogan from Corelogic, thank you very much for joining us there.
No problem. Thanks, Chris.